right. We'll get started now with our second panel. I'm very pleased to have Scott Mainwaring here to be the chair for this panel. Scott is in many ways the co-parent of IMTFI. The whole kind of concept for this thing came about partly in discussions the two of us were having when we were thinking together about digital money and questions around digital money that had to do less with security and encryption and more with the personal and social uses and meanings of money in a project that we worked on together under the auspices of Intel Labs for a while. And some people here were probably present for a conference that we organized here at UCI on quote-unquote everyday digital money right when the announcement came that IMTFI would be funded. So it's really a pleasure to have Scott with us here. Scott is a senior research scientist at the Interaction and Experience Research Group at Intel Labs. He's also the co-PI with me and Professor Paul Durish here at UC Irvine of the new Intel Science and Technology Center on Social Computing. And he is the chair of the External Advisory Board of IMTFI. So again, it's really wonderful to have Scott here with this thing that he has helped to create, and he will now chair our next panel. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Bill. It is wonderful to be here and to see the Institute and this conference growing year after year after year. The second panel for today is on the topic of shifting financial and technological literacies. We have 3 presentations. Each will be 20 minutes, and I'll hold up little yellow warning signs when you are nearing the end of your time for each of the presentations, so that we'll have plenty of time for discussion at the end of the session. So I'd like to start by welcoming Catherine Martineau and Pradeep Baisak, who will be talking about material cultures of financial literacy among rural and urban poor in Orissa, India.
I want to thank IMTFI for having us, and especially the staff who have been wonderful, and Jenny especially deserves many thanks from us. And we, let's see, where do I go? Are very sad that our collaborator Nishita Trisal is unable to be here. She had a dengue fever episode this fall and is still recovering. So Pradeep and I will split the presentation. He's going to begin today.
Thank you, that's fine. So, in the village hamlet of Bariguda in eastern India, in the state of Odisha, a below poverty line man named Punno tries to save a small amount of money each month. Below poverty line means it's a government designated line for the people who are living less than 50 cents a day. The family is well connected to both government and non-governmental aid programs, and Punno has even taken a 8,000 rupees business loan from a non-profit bank located in nearby town. Yet when this household achieves a saving of 300 rupees from their total monthly income of 5,000 rupees, rather than taking it down to the bank, Punno tucks it into a small metal box that he hides in the thatching of his roof. In India and other developing countries, numerous programs focused on poverty alleviation and financial inclusion encourages poor families to turn to banking institutions for their savings, borrowing, and investment. Yet, like this household in rural Odisha, most of India's poor adopt these institutions inconsistently, if at all. Encouraged by the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, India now frames the inconsistent adoption of banks as part of their wider problem of financial literacy. This last July, India's draft National Strategy for Financial Education detailed the knowledge, skills, and behavior that count as a financial literacy. India's finance minister has called this path by which financial inclusion will reach the underreached and unreached section of the society. Our research aims to question the very idea implicit in this understanding of financial literacy, the idea that poor people are not only poor but also ignorant of how best they manage their economic situations. To the contrary, we suggest that poverty may require great economic management skills, generally just not the same skills used in the banks. Moreover, as so many anthropological studies have shown, poor people frequently inhabit cultural worlds that differ in significant ways from the cultural worlds inhabited by the banks and finance ministers. This overlap of poverty and cultural difference can make it very difficult for financial inclusion programs to attract robust usage, as the programs frequently fail to address the existing concerns and capacities of their desired clientele. Our project was designated to improve in-depth case studies of a handful of poor households in India in order to examine the economic management skills that poor people actually do have and how these skills fit into their daily cultural lives. Because we are suspicious of how well our own idea of saving or investing would map onto the daily resource management of our research participants, we methodologically organized our research around the study of material culture. We asked what object and material practices do people use to organize, make sense of, store, transfer, and protect their resources. What are the qualities of those objects that matter most, or in other words, why those objects, and how do those objects fit into their broader social context. Today we'll share some of our early findings by sharing stories of a kind of object that we found to be important across our case studies, especially the houses and certain paper documents. Of course, anyone who has spent a day in India can tell you the importance of all these. Our research gets into interesting when we start exploring why and how these houses and documents were important in their particular social environments. While there are several qualities that can explain these objects' importance to resource management in Odisha, today we will focus on one quality that we found especially illuminating. A quality we are calling an object's multifunctionality. By multifunctionality, we mean simply that an object has multiple uses that everyone around it knows about. While this multifunctionality has been widely described in the material culture and linguistic anthropology literature, it has not been explored as a beneficial aspect of resource management among the poor. We are proposing that in Odisha, multipurpose objects are used to manage resources precisely because they are multipurpose, that is, because they have so many uses. We'll explore the cultural context in which multifunctionality seems crucial, suggesting that it helps people negotiate visibly. At the very end of our talk, we'll consider how multifunctionality might be useful to designers of financial inclusion programs like mobile money. We conducted our research in one urban and one rural neighborhood in Odisha, a state on the eastern coast of India that has long been considered as one of India's poorest. We intended to use geographic proximity to the urban areas as an indicator to institutional influence, but we found that households in both the sites equally involved in financial inclusion programs. Instead, difference in urban and rural life helps us to examine the role of institutions in everybody's routines. Nishita Trishal, another co-researcher who is absent here, conducted 5 rounds of long-form interviews with 8 households in Bariguda village, a village few kilometers from a small market town in southern Odisha. Bariguda is a home to about 220 households, almost all designated scheduled caste and tribe and below poverty line by the government. Most survive on seasonal income as unskilled agricultural laborers as well as various other odd jobs. I conducted interviews with 5 scheduled caste below poverty line households in Bhubaneswar, Odisha's state capital and my city of residence. I confined my research to the neighborhood of Old Town, a multiple caste and low income area of 30 to 40,000, in which most residents have historical relationship of service to one of the many temples in the area. Now, however, most of the low caste residents in the Old Town survive through daily unskilled labor and domestic service. I and Nishita are both introduced and assisted by local NGO workers. I request Catherine to take it forward.
It's a picture of Old Town. So I had intended to participate in the research in Bhubaneswar, but some personal issues prevented me from being there during the period of our research. So my work will take the research forward into the next phase. This was designed as a pilot project. Inspired by the anthropology of material culture, one of our research methods was to examine the kinds of objects that were being used for carrying, storing, counting, separating, and monitoring scarce economic resources, and to try to understand why those objects were used. As we looked at the wide variety of containers, baskets, pots, and bags, we began to see that they might be understood as part of a wider system of management, one bundled in the house. Consider, for example, Purno's house, a one-story, one-bedroom structure with a living room that converted at times into a sleeping area and at others into a workshop. When Nishita first peeked into Purno's house, she saw endless clutter, piles everywhere and apparently random objects and papers stuck in each corner. It took several visits for her to see the house as anything more. An other backward class, which is a government designation, middle-aged husband and father of 3 in Barigura, Purno is busy. He is an electrician, a shopkeeper, a tailor, a laborer, and a small landowner. The only son of his parents, he inherited the small shop in the front of his house from them, but because everyone in Barigura buys on credit, he's never made much money from the shop. Through his savvy diversification, enabled by his social position established through the shop, he was able to save enough to purchase a small parcel of land about a half kilometer from his house. This small parcel will provide a better income for his one son than any of Purno's other businesses, although it is currently leased to pay for his eldest daughter's recent wedding. All of these livelihood activities are orchestrated through Purno's house. He sews clothes, sells dry goods, fixes mobile phones, and keeps his agricultural equipment in different parts of his house. The piles of cloth, of baskets and boxes, the bags randomly bundled inside of other bags, each is also a means for separating and hiding, earmarking, and reminding. For example, a square of fabric and a list of measurements for an ongoing project could be wrapped in a polythene bag and hidden in the rice container, where they would be found the next day as a reminder of the sari blouse that must be finished. So you see that down here in the corner. A bill that needs paying can be suspended from the ceiling near the door. Money for a future land purchase can be hidden in a bag, inside one box, inside another box, and under some rags where it can be forgotten. To save money, I have to keep it far away, said another of Nishita's interviewees, and this is indeed what Purno accomplishes inside his house. Our evidence suggests that houses serve as important financial instruments because they are so much more than that. Houses materially reproduce social orders. They organize daily life. They provide shelter, and they are valuable investments. In our research sites, even when the ownership of the house plot was open to contestation, it was assumed that the house would shelter future generations. These many functions of the house increase its usefulness as a resource management tool in several ways. Social uses of the house shape social access to different areas of the house, and thus what is hidden there. The overlap of physical daily routines and economic management in the house allow for the training and socialization of children to those economic management styles, so that the children grow up in the house knowing how to care for their own finances. And very importantly, houses hide the financial activities of the household or its members. All at once, houses provide ways to store, earmark, remind, protect, and conceal. Concealing seems to be one of the major accomplishments of an object's multifunctionality, like this house, which we see when we look at the broader social context. In both of our sites, households rely on frequent small loans from others, loans as small as 50 to 100 rupees, which is about $1 or $2. These transactions help precarious households balance, and they are opportunities for building or returning obligations. Though formal institutions did supply a significant amount of credit to our research participants, they were consistently seen as inaccessible during times of duress. During times of duress, one turns to family, friends, and neighbors for loans that are immediate, interest-free, and without record. The visibility of money is a major factor influencing these informal loans. One wants to be able to lend in the right situation to the right person, and yet to avoid being called on at the wrong time. In contrast to saving in the house, going to the bank was seen as signaling both wealth and one's desire to flaunt it. As Prashant, a scheduled caste Bardigura villager, remarked, "If I go to the bank, everyone will say, 'He has lots of money. He puts lots of money in the bank.'" But obscurity might go even deeper than hiding from neighbors. An object's multifunctionality might even hide financial behavior from the user, him or herself, helping a person feel morally upright in a world in which desires for advancement are often seen as opposing moral obligations to extended kin, caste members, families, and friends and coworkers. So we might be interpreted as saying that houses are tools for managing resources because of persistent backwardness or pre-modernity in Odisha, and this is a major story that people tell about Odisha. We are not saying this, though. While it is likely that there are some historical continuities between, say, contemporary and pre-colonial resource management practices in Odisha, we are interested in how these practices exist now because they address contemporary modern concerns, such as, how do I prevent people from knowing how much money I have so that I can save for my son to go to technical college? And that's Purno's desire. In other words, we believe Purno's use of his house is a modern adaptation to a world that is infused with money and in which social relations alone will no longer guarantee a household's well-being. Okay, let's see here if I can figure out how to... Nope. Can you start it for me? Oh. No, you want to go back? Just click on the video. Excellent, thank you. Consider the way that many women in Old Town in Bardigura carry their money tied in their saris. These women have not adopted purses, wallets, or special bags because those methods draw attention to their contents. Keeping money in a piece of cloth says, "I have nothing, kichi nahi." The need for invisibility, which can be achieved by using objects that have many other uses, is an especially modern problem, a problem for a world in which rich people go to the banks. The multifunctionality of objects is not only about concealment, though. Consider documents, those epitomes of bureaucratic economic management and financial literacy. In general, as we expected, people felt great discomfort with paper documents, unable to recount their contents or meaning because of poor reading abilities and general associations between paper and power. But there were several remarkable counter cases in which documents were familiar and comfortable, and we think they may be explained by particular documents' multifunctionality, and especially how they performed public social roles. So Govinda, for example, knows his BPL, below the poverty line card, which gives him access to government rations of rice, kerosene, and sugar, because it plays multiple social roles in his life. So here you see him showing how he holds the BPL card when he goes, and he's able to describe all of the information on the card. The BPL card provides access to monthly rations, and it can serve as a photo ID, and it is the object of constant political maneuvers, as the politicians every election cycle promise to do new things with the BPL designation. Perhaps most importantly, though, the monthly ration distribution at the panchayat headquarters is an important social occasion in which all of the village is represented, because there are 3 families that are above poverty line. Similarly, Tuni understands the 2-page document of the loan she took for her daughter's education from a microfinance institution because of the social performance it involves. She explained to Pradeep that the interior columns track. She explained to Pradeep that the interior columns track each repayment on her 15,000 rupee loan, confirming that she must pay 340 rupees every week for a year. She is sure of this because each week the documents are part of a social routine that confirms it. Every Tuesday, Thuni carries the document to a 7 a.m. meeting in a nearby lane, and she's fined if she's late. There, she and 4 other women pay the loan collector, who marks their papers. If a woman cannot pay that day, the other women pay for her. Like Gobinda's BPL card, Thuni's loan document performs a public social role in addition to its official role as an institutional contract or identification. And it makes more sense to her because it is socially multifunctional. So our evidence suggests that the multifunctionality of objects can improve an object's usefulness and even its comprehensibility as a medium for resource management in Odisha. We offer this as one example of how people who live through frequent periods of great scarcity manage their resources skillfully in their cultural environments, and as a counter case to the assumptions of the financial literacy discourse. This example may also offer insights towards the design of better financial inclusion instruments. For example, we believe the introduction of mobile money, as we've been discussing today, drawing on those wonderfully multifunctional tools, mobile phones, could be successful in Odisha. However, to be successful, you need to be able to manage the visibility of it. So this might be accomplished through conducting transactions at shops where you do many other things, or by the ability to use your mobile phone account to move money into a bank account and vice versa. And these are things that I think are already going on. It's fascinating to learn about. So, but this need for invisibility does not mean that everything economic should be kept private. To the contrary, since the public performance of documents seems to improve their comprehensibility, financial inclusion programs would also do well to find a sensitive balance that both creates a public stage for general participation as well as for participants to obscure their specific financial actions. In essence, and in stark opposition to the OECD-supported financial education programs, the key to financial inclusion success is likely to be found not in explanations about compound interest or lessons about saving, but in the ability of financial inclusion programs and their material objects to take seriously poor people's existing concerns, commitments, and skills. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Our next presentation is on the impact of pure mobile microfinancing on the poor by Tony Omwansa and Tim Wollo.
Good morning, everyone. Let's do the video. My name is Tim Waima, also called Mololo. I was supposed to present with one of my PhD students, Tony Omwansa, who has written a book on M-Pesa, but he couldn't come because he finished his PhD, he passed his PhD, and he's graduating tomorrow. So he couldn't come. But I will present the findings. I'll start with a 4-minute. This is not my video. This is a video of Musoni. Musoni is a microfinance institution, but it gives you a context within which I will present my presentation. I'll make my presentation. This is the agenda of what I will present. And Musoni is a very interesting word. M stands for mobile, and Usoni means future. So it's like future mobile or mobile future. Yeah? And this is the video that we saw. Of course, in Kenya, the penetration of the mobile phone is very high. We estimate that out of the 40 million we are, more than 30 million have mobile phones. So the penetration is very high. If you remove the children, then almost everybody has a mobile phone. And the mobile phone really has gone beyond money transfer. People pay utilities, you can access services, even in a drink in a bar. You can access financial services and so on and so forth. And the focus here is on financial services, microfinance to be specific, as part of the financial inclusion agenda of the nation. Musoni basically was the first and is still the first organization to go 100% mobile, to go 100% paperless transactions. But it didn't go branchless. It still has branches where they recruit loanees. And as you heard, customers' loans are guaranteed within 72 hours, within 3 days. But often, when I was talking to one of the managers, most of the times you can get your loan within 24 hours. And those are some of the benefits. It's about less than 3 years old. Over 18,000 loans have been issued, 8,000 clients, largely in Nairobi. And we carried out our research in Nairobi. Looks like the objectives of the research there are two objectives. One was to establish how the clients gauge the socio-economic impact of utilizing technology-based financial services, and if it drives them to consider using less cash in other transactions. If, for example, you're using Musoni, do you start using electronic transactions for other things, other than loans, paying for loans, applying for loans, and so on and so forth? And the second objective was to establish and quantify the impact of cashless mobile microfinancing on the lives of poor people, because it is the poor that are accessing these loans and financial services, and including the shift towards cashlessness. Our approach is we are going to use the capability approach as our conceptual framework to look at the impact, particularly looking at the impact of using 100% mobile, paperless transactions on the socio-economic well-being of the poor people. And we started off by carrying out a quantitative study with 245 people that we administered questionnaires to. We designed the questionnaire around August 2012. We collected some data in October, and we made a progress report. Now we are going to give preliminary findings that we found from the quantitative data. But in January, we are going to carry out the more interesting part of the study, which is the qualitative data collection, talking to people who have accessed these things and looking at the impact that it has had on their lives. And hopefully by February, March, we should be finishing. Demographics, these are the people that we collected data from, largely high school dropouts, most of them married, and majority were women. 245 respondents from 34 groups, like the groups you saw. In terms of preliminary findings, this thing is not very good. Trying to move the slides. This is, in terms of source of loans, you can see most of the people got their loans from Roscars, some of them from MFIs, friends and family, and so on and so forth. So you can see these groups, savings and credit groups, associations, the majority. In terms of membership of MFIs, before joining Musoni, 44% were members of more than one microfinance institution. But after joining Musoni, only 18%, which means there has been a drop. Many people dropped other microfinance institutions that they were borrowing money from and so on and so forth. And probably we think it is because of this. Musoni is best, I don't need another MFI. This is one of the mottos of Musoni. In terms of why people choose Musoni, this is, you can see the majority say it is the one that uses M-Pesa. And M-Pesa is very widespread in the country. A significant number says because family members, friends recommended it. In terms of other reasons why the choice of Musoni as a microfinance institution, we believe it is two factors. One, Musoni itself as an organization. These are the factors, the four factors: easy to access credit, the loan interest is very low, good service, very efficient. But we think it is also because of M-Pesa. Because M-Pesa also provides the good service, is very efficient, but also the convenience, the faster to get credit, the quick response, like the responses you saw. These are the main reasons why people prefer this microfinance institution. Using M-Pesa for loans is better than cash because of what? This is one of the questions that we asked in the questionnaire. And very interestingly, I want you to look at this one. It saves money. And therefore, they see this as the fact that they see that this is a way of saving money is a very significant thing to note. What makes you prefer Musoni over other microfinance institutions? And the reasons are given there. I get my money faster, services are more convenient, receiving loans in M-Pesa is safer, and so on and so forth. But I want you to take note of this last one. It helps avoid handling too much cash. Yeah? And given that we are very much a cash society, this is significant. Although it's a very small percentage, but this is significant. It shows that we are moving towards cashlessness or away from handling too much cash. Which statements are true about using M-Pesa for a loan? And these are the answers. Tracking loan and repayments is better and easier with M-Pesa. Repaying loan using M-Pesa is better than, and so on and so forth. So you can see there's value for money is appreciated by these loanees. The other issue is, one, keeping the money in M-Pesa for uses besides loan repayments. And I want you to focus on these three bars where they say 30% say, I keep a little bit, a reasonable amount, and a substantial amount. If you add all these percentages, almost 80% are saying they keep the extra money as idle electronic money in their mobile phones, which is very interesting. How much money do you keep in M-Pesa? And basically here, you can see the average is about $40 in their mobile phones. The other point is, which of these services do you use? They buy airtime using, you can see the majority buy airtime using M-Pesa. They pay bills using M-Pesa. They use Okoa Jahazi. Okoa Jahazi is like taking a small loan to make a call or to send an SMS when you don't have money in your phone. And you, of course, you pay with a small interest. You save money using M-Pesa, pay for goods using M-Pesa, pay school fees, like has been mentioned before. But you can see there are very many uses of, you can see using M-Pesa, their phone to repay their loans is a very small percentage. And you can say all these other uses for mobile money. So it has gone beyond loan repayments. If it was possible, I would do the following transactions. What is this? Oh, I will do transactions in M-Pesa. You can see not many people want to hold cash. You can see a lot of people do their transactions using M-Pesa. So the desire to go cashless is there within this population. What do you do when you receive your loan money through M-Pesa? After you receive your money, what do you do? Withdraw it at once, very small, 27%. Keep it all in M-Pesa, 10%. Withdraw when I need and keep the rest in M-Pesa, which is this. So it is the use of M-Pesa to save, which is significant here. Yeah. The next one is, do you send some of the loan to the bank via M-Pesa? And majority of the people say no. Most of these people are unbanked. Yeah. But a small percentage, almost 25%, a quarter, are interested in creating a credit history. They are interested in sending some of that money into a bank account. And there is a Safaricom which launched M-Pesa, actually launched a new product last week where you can be able to open a bank account using your mobile phone, similar to this, but with more services. Why do you change M-Pesa back to cash? And the main reasons are these two, that most people I send money to would rather use cash. It's expensive to transact using M-Pesa. Thank you very much. And these are the two main barriers to cash or to moving towards cashlessness, these two issues. The fact that most people are still using cash, it is expensive, so the transaction cost is still an issue to these. And remember, these are very poor people. Since I began using Musoni services, you can see I do more transactions using M-Pesa. So this confirms, over 80%, they confirms the impact of cashless mobile microfinancing on other transactions. Yeah? Why do you retain money in M-Pesa? And you can see here, almost 50% are saying it is safer remaining in M-Pesa than converting into cash. So it confirms the need for services beyond mobile money transfer. Maybe the safety of M-Pesa, and so on and so forth. And then this last slide is, I will not change to any other MFI if it does not use mobile phones. And you can see it's almost 50-50 in terms of whether they will change to another MFI, 50-50. The implications, I leave it up to you to think about the implications. The key conclusions are that there is evidence of the appreciation of the impact of cashless transactions. There is desire to shift towards cash light. There are barriers for BOP, bottom of the pyramid, to make the shift. And the two barriers that you saw earlier, challenges, the dependence on cash, most people depending on cash, and the transaction cost of cash. And the final conclusion is pegging mobile money to a product used by these people makes it easier for them to appreciate cash light. And people really, basically, a lot of these people had already experienced money transfer, and therefore it was easy to switch and move to using cashless transactions for microfinancing. And probably this is one of the reasons why Safaricom launched what they call M-Shwari, which is 100% mobile-based. Not money transfer, but banking services together with a bank. And there is no paper. It's cashless as well. In terms of the final, I know you have said this. In terms of moving forward, we just collected this data very quickly, just to give you an idea of what is happening. But the more interesting part is now to use the framework that we chose to use to actually talk to the loanees and establish whether they're using cashless transactions or cash light has had any impact on their social and economic well-being. And probably we will compare this with the other non-Musoni clients. We'll do this through focus group discussions, through in-depth interviews, and so on and so forth. This will happen early next year, and if there's another meeting next year, probably we'll have more interesting stories to tell. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. And our last speaker for this session is Mesfin Woldmariam, who will be talking about mobile money information system architecture for open air market.
Okay. Thank you so much for all the people working in the IMTFI. And my presentations or paper's title is about information systems architecture that could support open air market practices. I am from Ethiopia, and this is my second paper from IMTFI. This is the outline that I have for this presentation. I will have introduction, some related works in the areas of payment architectures, mobile payment architectures, methodologies, preliminary findings, conclusions, and a way forward, or what are some of my next tasks. The situation that we have is financial service problems and the development of mobile technologies. Especially from the developing world perspective, we are all speaking about financial service problems, plus on the other side, we have the ubiquitous development of mobile technologies or wireless communications in general. Added with this, we have observing people's linking their everyday money practices with mobile phones. A typical case is earlier presentation about in Kenya. And the development of ubiquitous technologies almost becoming very common everywhere. And societies are becoming and they want to be cashless societies. Even the earlier presentation is a very enlightening about why people want us to be cashless. Having this context in mind, this indicates that there is an indication that money is going to be materialless. There are papers and works which indicates the future of money is no more papers, no more coins. Rather, they're equivalent in the form of digital finance. But there are lack of personal information system management, or what kind of systems are relevant to manage everyday money practice, because everybody has his or her own practice of handling or managing their money. And in light with this, we lack information systems or technologies that support the needs of individual people. But there are also no frameworks with regard to how such systems can be designed. From some of the literatures, there are so many attempts that tries to address the issue of financial services in the form of ATM machines as well as agent networks. But although these things seems to be physically right in the developing world, they have some problems in developing. ATM usually not suitable for sparsely populated rural communities and which requires electricity, and the rural communities are running in short of, or there is no possibility of gaining electricity, as well as their population is very scarce. Agent networks, they have liquidity problems, as well as it requires a ubiquitous telecom SMS infrastructures. Again, this is unlikely to have in the developing world. Current mobile payment architectures, again, the architectures requires merchants and customers to have a bank account. But in developing world, how many people have a bank account, especially in rural communities? Added with this, these architectures are usually developed in the context of developed countries, not developing countries. So there is a huge gap as regards to financial services for the developing worlds. The other bottleneck which we can observe in developing countries is there is low practice and service of bank-based accounts. Bank account-based transactions are almost nil or none. Frequent interruption of telecom services. There is no signals and services at underground buildings, for example, in developing countries. Underground buildings is unlikely to get telecommunication signals. So if there is a possibility of making a transaction under buildings, it means that there is a difficulty of exchanging financial transactions. During national and religious holidays also, because of there is high congestion of network telecommunication, which makes SMS-based payment system to be impractical because there is high telecom congestions during these days, national as well as religious holidays. SMS-based payment architecture is also not appropriate for micropayments. And imagine when when someone is going to be charged 35 cents to pass on to or to pay 50 cents. So the research question is, it's very important to research and look for user-centered architecture rather than bank or telecom-centered architecture. My interest is if money is digital, let's call it a mobile money, what has to be the characteristic nature of mobile money information system architecture or functionalities in the context of illiterate rural communities who transact in the open air market? Methodology-wise, simply, in Ethiopia, we have like around 65 million rural people living in rural areas. They transact in the open air market. Data is collected from different sites from September to November. Observation, interview, as well as discussions were made, or were used to collect the data, and different market segments were considered. Usually, I have collected data from such different market segments in the open air market, and profile-wise, the respondents were selected in a random selection manner. Accordingly, there are people have different religion, age-wise. I came across from 60 to 95 years old participating in the open air market. Education, academics or formal education perspective from 0 grade to a BA degree level, from business experience from half a year to 30 years practice in the open air market. So what are the findings? The first finding that I have seen is people identify currencies through their color, size, and pictures on them. You can see that these are different notes of money that we have, and people identify what is what through the color as well as the pictures. And nobody reads what this number is, especially those illiterate people who have a 0 grade. Keeping in mind that we are going to digitize this money, how those people who identify such currencies will identify them from architectural design perspective, I mean. The other is how merchants in the open air market organize themselves. The first observation that I had is like this woman, she wants to, she puts every money in a small bag. She's a coffee seller, retailer, and she has every money she collects from the open air market put inside this bag. And in the second case, this is a person, and he wants to have 2 separate bags. This is for coffee, this is for salt. So we can see that some of people want to put every money in one pocket, like this one, and some others want to keep or have a different bags to keep their sales from different items into different bags. And unlike the previous 2, some others even do not have a bag. They put their money under some items we can call. And such way of organizing their daily sales have its own problems. We will be coming to what the problems are. The common mistakes and errors that merchants make. This diagram is to indicate that this a single person in the open air market is going to speak with a lot of people surrounding him, which each one of them have different items to buy from. And this makes the person to be very busy throughout the whole day during the transaction date. Accordingly, there is no queuing of customers and items are not pre-packaged. And this will lead the previous guy, this merchant, to make some errors and mistakes. These mistakes are, merchants are not sure who has paid them and who hasn't, because they are busy and everybody is shouting to him, and how much money was received and whether the changes were made or not. Again, he used to forget and put the sales of an item into the wrong bag. For some merchants who keep the sales of different items in their respective bags, sometimes they used to put their daily sales in the wrong bag, and customers are not willing to accept all the monies during changes. Like, for example, this. Especially, some people do not want to accept such type of old monies when they are given in the form of changes. And keep in mind, are we going to have such type of old monies in the digital era, in the cashless eras? The other is cash can get lost by wind. This is another problem that open air merchants have. And money can stick together and be counted as one, especially during rainy seasons. And forgery money notes and unable to differentiate. People from the urban areas having or taking forgery notes try to buy some items from the rural communities. And lack of changes during the transaction is another problem that these people have. How they solve these problems? From the discussion that I have, disagreement between the merchants and customers regarding how much was accepted, whether changes were made or not, is resolved by asking people around for witnessing. And then sometimes they go for back tracing, confessing how much they have and like getting into the pocket of one another's and look whether how much they have come during the first time. The very interesting thing, which I think I have found from this observation is, I have asked them what are the features of any automated tools that they would like to have, if any. For this question, they just came up with, or they informed me a lot of very interesting things. The first thing is, they want the device to protect their money from thefts. They have a worry and problem of theft. They want the device to handle their money easy, able to identify the profits and losses from each item categories. Those devices which identify cheaters and thieves, that can tell the balance by sound because there is a problem of literacy, and much of them wants the device or the machines to communicate in the form of sound, not in the form of any other interfaces, and do financial mathematics like sales, costs, profit, loss, and changes. They want devices to have this and other features. Like, for example, a device that is able to tell when making mistakes can be integrated with mobile phones for alerting purpose. They want to get alerted when some thefts or misappropriation is going to happen. A device that is capable of counting money, because the old people usually have such type of interest. Then the device needs to be very cheap, durable, easy to carry on, and operate by sound, able to generate changes for the transaction. Again, changes were some of the problems. That can detect people who has not paid and the like. The previous are regarding the merchants, and from the buyer's perspective, there is activities called delegating one another. And the illiterates keep separately when they get delegated, but relatively educated people keep a note of it and aggregate with their money. But this has a problem which attracts, as it appears to be a lump sum of money, it attracts the eyes of thefts and burglars. And another very interesting point is there is a small video which indicates about how they negotiate over price of items in the open market.
You're showing about the women. What about objects of storing and saving for men who are part of the financial economy? The second question is to the Musoni microfinance, a very interesting study. But I like to know about when you talk about the benefit of this particular system, where you say that lower risks, how do you tackle defaults in the loan repayment, and what is the repayment rate through this lending program or through the mobile phone? Thank you.
Well, I'm voicing Nishita's research here, so I can't say that I actually know. I mean, I don't know all of the details about banking in Boriguda. There are self-help groups through which most of the banking is done through. And the self-help groups take loans. Self-help groups are government and also NGO organized groups that of about 15 women or so that are organized to take loans or to do savings to encourage responsible financial behavior. And so many people have contact with bank through these self-help groups. And I was interested, and Pradeep explored this in Bhubaneswar, that despite these self-help groups, when people took on or decided that they needed to save for something themselves, they didn't turn toward the self-help groups to help save. So even though there are these infrastructures locally to help achieve individual goals, people still are doing things like putting their savings in their roof. So there is a fair amount of banking, and we actually had a hard time getting at that as well. People weren't completely sure that they wanted to share with us all of the ways that they were connected to institutions.
Maybe I'll add a little. Whenever it comes to linkage of the women in self-help groups to banks, the amount the women can save is now public. The other women in the group knows. But everybody actually doesn't want her income savings to be known to the public, or for that matter to the other women in the group. That may be one of the reasons that they, apart from the savings in banking system, they do save money near themselves for whatever purpose they best know it. My interaction with 5 families in Bhubaneswar showed that I found it actually difficult to extract the ways they wanted to save. People feel it quite reluctant to share all of their financial dealings with you. So, I mean, after even 2-3 interactions, when I stumbled across one woman saving money through a piggy bank, I was astonished. She didn't share it in first 2 interactions. So saving behavior, people generally try to keep it to themselves. They do not share with others.
And I'm sorry, just in point, Purno is actually a man. So we were talking, most of the paper was about man's practices of saving. I forgot. Anyway, thank you.
Let me add, for the case of Kenya, the people who are banked are very few. A couple of years ago, I think the figure stood at less than 20% of the people who are banked. So there is a very elaborate program to increase the number of people who are banked. And there was a new act which allows for banks to appoint agents to create branches or to create outlets in the rural areas. And this would be largely local entrepreneurs who have a shop, who are probably M-Pesa agents, who have proved that they are business people. And they go through a criteria. There's a criteria for becoming a bank agent. And this is a part of the financial inclusion strategy that the country has to increase the number of people who are banked. And therefore, local people can be able to access financial services from their local market through the shopkeeper or whatever, whoever has been appointed as an agent. This is currently taking place, and most of the banks, or the big banks, are part of this initiative.
So my name is Dipti from Center for Microfinance, and my question is for the third presenter from Ethiopia. You talked about cash handling and discussed about the disadvantages of cash handling also. And obviously it has many disadvantages of theft, and cash handling itself is quite difficult. But you also showed us the video of the open market, and my question is, do you think the digitization of transaction is possible? Like, I know the entrepreneur, the person who's selling is ready for the technology. What about his customers? Will he lose clients if he adopts these technologies? What about other factors, like, he's dealing with retailers, or, there are probably different dynamics. So I think it'll be interesting. I don't know if you have interviewed those people who come to the market to purchase things, if they are ready for the electronic transaction, or if not, then probably it will be interesting if you interview, probably cover those dynamics also.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I didn't ask, there is no electronic finance in those areas which I have interviewed. The people whom I just met do not have any ideas about what a mobile money is, what a digital currency is. But in general, after my observation and discussing about what the problems they have, and I just informally asked them what kind of technology, if there is any, that they would like to see. And they are informing me that they want to see these features to be included in a system or in a technology that can be available maybe in the future. I found that it's irrational and it's illogical to speak about what a mobile money is, what a digital currency is with those people. And the other issue you raised is whether there is a possibility of losing customers or not. I think because of the manual nature, because of the characteristic nature of cash-based transactions, which takes some time for the customer as well as the merchants in counting, checking whether it is not old money or not, that will take some time. In the meantime, unless otherwise, that merchant is fast enough to keep the customers for him, those people may go to the others. or which delays the transaction process. But if we see from technology perspective, from digital money perspective, because there is no problem of counting now and then, no problem of like checking whether that money is forgery or not, the issue of even making changes, because these things can get avoided by digital technology, digital finance, I think the problem of losing customers might be minimized or avoided, so that this attracts the attention of maybe merchants to adopt a new future technologies.
I'm Rosina Nasir from Hyderabad. I have a question regarding Musoni. Can you please tell me that what is the interest rate in this Musoni is charging, and do you find any default rate also? Because because they prefer to be with Musoni for what reason? Because if you take a case of India, in India, a lot of society you can discover, and you find it happens in Andhra Pradesh, because same client is borrowing money from different MFIs. And here in your study, you have been showing that people who have been engaged with this particular MFI, they want to be with it and they don't want to borrow money from others. That is something very amazing, that people always want money to increase their business. What is the reason? They are fulfilling all the amount. What is the total amount? What's the amount they have been giving to their clients in terms of loan? One. And second, what is the interest rate? I just want to specify my question, that interest rate, amount of loan they have been giving to clients, and what is, do you find any default or not?
Thank you very much. I can answer some of the questions. I might not be able to answer all of them. Like the interest rate, I will not be able to tell you what the interest rate is. But the default rate is much lower than equivalent MFIs that are using traditional technology. And actually the data, the Musoni has told us that they have the data in terms of default rate, which we are going to analyze in the next stage, and compare that with the industry average in this space. So the default rate, definitely we know overall is lower than the traditional MFIs. The reason why people like or wanted more credit, like the video you saw, is because a lot of poor people are denied credit, have no access to credit. And when this method of easy access, relatively easy access to credit was there, and the easy way of paying, of accessing the money, as you were saying, you can pay any time, even from the toilet or wherever you are, and so on and so forth. It was very convenient. In other places, you'll have to go to the branch and pay and go through a lot of work. A lot of these people need all the time they have for their business, and therefore they don't want to be distracted and going to the branches to do transactions. So they really liked the idea of working with the mobile phone to do everything from the mobile phone.
Actually, first of all, I just wanted to say this panel really hung together really nicely, and it was fantastic and really illuminating. I learned about numeracy and illiteracy and the role of old age, and it was in these kinds of, so a study of the real material practices that people are engaged in when they're trading money back and forth. And so I have more of an observation that, just to make sure I grasp one of the things that was presented. And it was the last video that we watched, which was great. And I just wanted to make sure that I understood what the message was, which, as I understood it, was that there was the difference between the gestures of actually speaking numbers out and then using actual cash to denote what the offer is. And if insofar as I'm correct about that, I just you're right. I think it's really interesting that the structure and format of money itself hasn't been written up that much. And then I just wanted to mention that I think a fruitful place to look instead then would be something that has been sort of discussed and documented is the digitization of other markets. Like there's a well-known book on the Chicago Futures Exchange that tracked, because it was if I'm understanding it correctly, it was precisely that sort of, a lot of traders were concerned that, well, wait a minute, I'm big and I get to stand above all these other guys, and and the actual gesturing was going to be lost when it became digitized. So there actually is an interesting literature in that, if that's where you were going, but I wasn't sure. Anyways, it was great. Thanks.
And excuse me, could you just say who you are?
Oh, sorry. Right. Kristof Peoples from the New School.
Thanks. I'm Kevin Donovan from the University of Cape Town. I had a question for Timothy about the credit scoring that you mentioned, and maybe if you could speak about the dynamics of how Musoni is creating these credit scores. Are they using the mobile data, or is that still residing only with Safaricom and the product that they released last week? And then maybe around the dynamics of transparency or recourse of people to know their credit scores and how they might be able to push back on things that they feel are misleading in those.
Sibel Kusimba from Northern Illinois University. With regard to Musoni, you showed a chart where you looked at sources of cash. I guess that was sources of cash for repaying the loan. And you mentioned those sources of cash were Roscas and family and friends, I believe, were the two most common ones. Is that unusual with the microfinance? It does seem like that people are actually taking out other loans just to repay your loan, and I'm wondering if you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, are you really getting anywhere? I'm wondering, have you looked into that in terms of long-term, what are people doing with these funds?
Let me start with the last one. Basically, with that question, we wanted to establish ordinarily where do people get their money from, and it's definitely from Roscas and families. But there was a huge shift after Musoni introduced this to people getting their money as a loan from Musoni. And you saw with the other question that they had multiple MFIs that they were accessing money from. But after Musoni introduced, they reduced the number of other MFIs that they were accessing loans from. So that's a very interesting question, whether people are still borrowing from some other place to be able to repay or whatever, or they're getting all the money from the business. Interesting question to look at. Yeah.
That does happen in Odisha. In fact, Tuni, who we spoke of, the loan she's repaying, that 15,000 rupee loan, she does, if necessary, she'll borrow from her friends to make up her family or friends to make up the weekly payment.
The interest rate that Tuni is paying is also high as calculating. I mean, on the face of it, it seems very simple. She takes a 15,000 loan, and the weekly repayment is 340 rupees. So it seems very simple, but if you calculate it, it's 24% interest, which is much higher than any commercial rate of interest. That's one of the reasons that these people find it difficult to repay. And because it's weekly, it makes the things really miserable many a times, and they have to borrow from neighbor or friends. So, yeah, thank you.
The question from Cape Town, the gentleman from Cape Town, about credit scoring. For Musoni, they only use Safaricom's M-Pesa as a channel for their clients to access money and transfer money. they really do not get any information from Safaricom on their loanees. Yeah? With the product that Safaricom launched with one of the local banks, I do not have a lot of data, but what I know is that this local bank will be accessing the client information from Safaricom. Because last year, I think last year or the year before, we introduced a requirement to register all the SIM cards with all the information. You provide information, your ID number, your name, and several other information. And therefore, they will be able to access that information from Safaricom. But they will also access information from the National Registration Bureau, where you have your national ID details. And that is part of the information they will be accessing. I do not have the actual details because it was launched recently, and I haven't quite had time to look at it. But maybe there are several people from Kenya here who probably might know. They might shed light on this. But the information will come from the bank, from the application form from the application information that you provide when you're applying for a loan, when you are creating the account. It will also come from Safaricom. It will also come from the National Registration Bureau.
I think we have time just for 2 more quick questions.
Hi, my name is Karthikeya Bajpayee. I had a follow-up question. In our work in India, we came across this sort of a gray area with some services where you're allowed to hold some kind of balance, and you also have this affordance of taking a loan. The gray area, like the RBI, the Indian regulatory authority, is not that kind of frowns upon some of these practices in the sense that you could possibly have a loan repayment due, and you could say that I don't have the money, but they could look at your account balance and be like, no, you don't actually, you actually have balance. So there is this sort of autonomy, privacy issues which come up with sort of collating a lot of this data, and I just wanted to know if there's any such issues in these contexts.
Hi, I'm Mike Burton from UCI. We're hearing some very compelling arguments for why people would want to switch from cash to mobile money in terms of the problems of cash, the material problems of cash. It can be blown away from the wind, people can steal it, and so forth. We also have heard an interesting presentation about the bargaining in the market that illustrates the benefits of cash, which is it has a materiality that connects with the embodiment of social relations, and in particularly informal social relations that poor people in much of the world depend on. And so that if you go completely to mobile money, it is hard to bargain like that. And I'm curious if whether people who are doing these questionnaires have thought of asking really detailed questions from people about on what circumstances they would benefit from cash and how they would structure those as questionnaire questions and how you would link that with qualitative interview data. Because I really think that I'm one of the people who thinks cash will never go away because there are uses for it, including the fact that it's untraceable, but that its usage is going to change and its uses are going to diminish, but it won't go away. And so it's really curious, when will people always want to have it? Okay, thank you.
Let me start by actually talking about the privacy issues this gentleman has mentioned. This is the first time we are having some of these financial institutions, mobile phone companies having access to a lot of data that is stored by the state, by the government. And our privacy laws are not very strong. We still need to look at them. I'm sure a lot of privacy issues will come up, like you have just pointed out. But I also want to come to the question about social relations. I am doing a different study looking at the impact of broadband in the IT industry, tourism, and IT-enabled services. And I had a look at, I visited the tea auction in Mombasa. This is the biggest, globally, the biggest tea auction in the world. And there was a proposal to automate the auctioning process, just like and there's a lot of bargaining that takes place, and the testing of tea and with people's mouths and so on and so forth, and the physical presence in the process of negotiation, and there was a huge resistance. How do you replace these social processes, which we value? And this is very important. In automating, you must think, how do you do this electronically? Because if you ignore that, then there will be a lot of resistance, and then things will not happen. So this is one of the challenges that we must have. And probably to be a marriage, so there will be some social processes that will be still left, and then some aspects will be automated. This is my...
Can't we think that we can keep the physical interaction as it is while replacing the papers and coins into their equivalent digital form? Because this is a research, there could be a possibility or way out. We can keep the physical interactions, the social processes, everything as it is, while converting papers and coins into their digital formats. But the question might be how, and that has to be answered through research.
So I would like to thank again all our presenters, and as well as the excellent questions. Sorry we don't have more time for discussion, but we now have a break for lunch. And Bill, do you want to explain the logistics for lunch?